Good morning. Welcome to the UU Church of the Hill Country here in Kerrville, Texas. We are happy to have at least one visitor today. Donna Lilly is with us. Are there any other visitors that I can't see? We're glad you joined us, Lee, or Donna. I'm sure you will enjoy Lee. She's quite a treasure. We'll now have the announcements. If you can type them in the chat, please, okay? If not, raise your hand.
To everybody in the congregation over the next week or so. So be ready to greet me kindly and open your pocket for all the people that the wonderful Unitarian Service Committee are helping. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Jerry's got his hand up. Let me get you on there, Jerry.
Am I there yet? Oh, okay, thank you. We are going to have a Zoom congregation meeting probably the 27th of December. So there'll be some upcoming news from that from Susan. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, all right, Mike, 1 second here.
To follow what Jerry's saying, part of what will be considered at the congregational meeting is the next year's budget. So what I'd like to encourage everyone to do is look at their pledge for this year, see if they have matched it, and if not, please try to do so. But also begin thinking about your pledge for next year and possibly giving us say a 2 to 5% increase if possible. I know this is a weird time to be asking for that, but start thinking about it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll now light our chalice. Our chalice is a flame to light our path. Fire consumes and casts a bright light. May our chalice flame consume our regrets for the past, our fears about the future, and our worries about today. May it light us for a path of joy and peace. We'll now have our first song. Thank you. And now Lee will share with us a reading.
Our reading is from the poem A Great Wagon by Rumi, a 13th century Persian poet and Sufi mystic. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep.
Thank you, Lee. Unworkable situation. And now, anyone else? All right, would you please join with me in reading our mission statement and our affirmation? The words will be displayed on the screen. We journey together, guided by UU values, to seek, nurture, and serve our loving church family, our community, and our world. The doctrine of this church is love. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. And this is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity in fellowship, as we strive to have all souls grow into harmony with the divine. We'll now have our virtual offering. You just pretend that plate is passing around, or mail your donations or your pledges to the church, or drop them in the door. Our expenses go on. You're all doing extremely well, helping us support the church and the extra expenses we've had this year. So we thank you for that. And now we'll have a song, To Mercy, Pity, Peace, and Love. And now we welcome Legault back to our pulpit, our virtual pulpit. After 15 years practicing as an attorney, she was called to a different kind of counseling. We've been with her on this journey as she prepares for it. She's now working as a hospital chaplain resident in Austin and is looking forward to a September 2021 ordination at the First UU Church. So we welcome you, Lee, and we welcome your wise words.
Thank you, Linda. As Linda mentioned, I have spent the last 3 months working as a hospital chaplain, and I love it. I spend 12 hours a week in a virtual classroom learning the principles and theories of chaplaincy, and the other 40 hours a week applying what I have learned and building my skills working directly with patients. More even than I am learning, I am unlearning. I am unlearning ways of being and communicating that I've been inundated with since birth and that were honed to a razor's edge in my law practice. My old way of communicating involved judgment, persuasion, reasoning, logic, head and intellect-based skills that I was very proud of. In my new world, I use heart-based skills. I speak little and I listen a lot. I ignore red herrings of judgments and evaluations and listen for the feelings and needs underneath them. In doing so, people open up their lives to me and share their innermost selves, gifts that I hold sacred. In this kind of communication, I don't so much communicate as commune. On the night of September 29th, 2020, I was on call at the hospital, and in between patient emergencies, I watched snatches of the first presidential debate. And I read chapters in the book that my chaplain educators had assigned to me, Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. The contrast between what I saw on TV, experienced in patient rooms, and read in my book was so stark that it forced an unpleasant conclusion, that my old way of being and communicating was essentially the same as what I was fuming at seeing in the presidential debate. My old way brought out or pointed out the worst in people, highlighting their wrongness and flaws. My old way of communicating was frankly violent. White psychologist and peace activist Marshall Rosenberg, author of the book that I was reading at the hospital that night, developed his practice of nonviolent communication in the 1960s as a tool for desegregation of schools in the United States. He studied with psychologist Carl Rogers, a hero of mine who was a founder of the humanist psychology and the person-centered approach to therapy. Nonviolent communication, NVC for short, is as much a spiritual practice, though, as a communication style. It's based on the ancient Indian theological principle of ahimsa, the natural state of compassion when no violence is present in the heart. Ahimsa is a key virtue in Hinduism, Buddhism, and especially Jainism. and it deeply informed Gandhi's activism. Before one can practice NVC as a communication style, Rosenberg admonishes that one must develop NVC as a consciousness and a spiritual intent. He says, most of us grew up speaking a language that encourages us to label, compare, demand, and pronounce judgments, rather than to be aware of what we are feeling and needing. This life-alienating communication is rooted in views of human nature that have exerted their influence for several centuries. These views stress humans' innate evil and deficiency, and a need for education to control our inherently undesirable nature. Such education often leaves us questioning whether there's something wrong with whatever feelings and needs we may be experiencing. We learn early to cut ourselves off from what's going on within ourselves. He continues, life-alienating communication both stems from and supports hierarchical or domination societies. It would be in the interests of kings and czars that the masses be educated in a way that renders them slave-like in mentality. The more people are trained to think in terms of moralistic judgments that imply wrongness and badness, the more they are being trained to look outside themselves, to outside authorities, for the definition of what constitutes right, wrong, good, and bad. When we're in contact with our feelings and needs, we humans no longer make good slaves and underlings, end quote. From a theological perspective, I think that Rosenberg's theory of nonviolent communication requires buy-in on three beliefs. One, that people are at their core good and compassionate. Two, that there are universal human needs. And three, that we are interconnected beings, such that what we say and do to one another matters to all of us. Unitarian Universalism aligns with all three of these theological beliefs. Our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, shows UU alignment with the idea that people are good and compassionate beings, and that there is a spark of the divine in everyone, waiting to be recognized and addressed. Together, our second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, and our sixth principle, the goal of world peace and community, liberty, and justice for all, show UU alignment with the theological belief that there are universal human needs. Our seventh principle, respect for the interdependent web of existence of which we are all a part, shows alignment with the third theological principle of NVC, that what one of us says and does matters to all of us. Adopting nonviolent communication as a spiritual practice allows us to speak our principles into the world. The actual process of nonviolent communication has four parts. One, observe without evaluating. Two, express how you are feeling. Three, acknowledge the need behind the feeling. And four, make a request that would enrich your life. Every one of these stages is rich with wisdom, but today we will focus on stages 2 and 3, feelings and needs. The world mostly teaches us to stuff our feelings down, project them onto others, or deceptively package our judgments about others as our own feelings. Growing up, I think I memorized more vocabulary words related to geometric figures did feeling words. And it turns out that trapezoids play a distinctly less critical role in my daily life than emotions. To develop NVC as a spiritual practice, I'm learning a whole new vocabulary of feeling words. During seminary, when I was studying Hebrew, I taped a piece of paper with the Hebrew alphabet to the inside of my medicine cabinet, and I looked at it every morning when I brushed my teeth. And now I took that down and I have pages of feeling words taped up instead. And sadly, many of them are about as foreign as the Hebrew was. During our talk back, I'll put a link to these lists of feeling words in the chat box. During that first presidential debate, which I think was about as violent a discussion as I have ever heard, I was struck by how angry both candidates seemed and the absence of the anger ever being directly named and owned. I much preferred the tone and language of President-elect Biden's victory speech. I'll read a few lines of it and listen if you can hear the feeling words and notice what feelings they register or evoke in you. I am humbled by the trust and confidence you have placed in me. I'm proud of the campaign we built and ran. I'm proud of the coalition we put together, the broadest and most diverse in history. Talking about a hymn that means a lot to his family, I hope it can provide some comfort and solace to the more than 230,000 families who have lost a loved one to this terrible virus this year. And to those who voted for President Trump, I understand your disappointment tonight. Feelings form a foundation for real communication. Feelings connect us. Identifying our own feelings and expressing curiosity about the feelings of the other speaker honors the inherent worth and dignity of both parties as human beings. After identifying feelings, the next step in nonviolent communication is identifying the universal need that underlies the feeling. Feelings never arise in isolation. There is a cause for the feeling. And importantly, the words or actions of another person cannot be the cause of our own feelings. Yes, a person's actions or words may stimulate a feeling in me, but that feeling is born of my own met or unmet need. I did not feel exasperated during the first presidential debate because Donald Trump and Joe Biden kept interrupting each other. I felt exasperated because my need for a sense of safety in our leaders went unmet when they spoke over each other. Connecting our feelings to our own needs, it takes a lot of practice and a healthy dose of humility, but it is the path to growing compassion. As little as the world prepares us to name our own feelings, it prepares us even less to name fundamental human needs. A few of these are love, acceptance, belonging, physical and emotional safety, peace, order, and meaning. I'll put a link to a list of needs in the chat box during the feedback session. One of the things that I love most about our Unitarian Universalist principles is that they beautifully articulate fundamental human needs. With an ear to unmet needs, think back to the vice presidential debate. Vice President-elect Kamala Harris said repeatedly, "Mr. Vice President, I am speaking." I liked when she said that, but using NVC, she might have offered, "Mr. Vice President, I feel frustrated and irritated because my needs for respect and order are not being met when you interrupt me." I wonder if her ratings would have suffered if she put it that way. And I bet so. Our society is not set up to recognize or value clear and direct articulations of feelings and needs. And that's too bad, because as Dr. Rosenberg puts it, the moment people begin talking about what they need rather than what's wrong with one another or one another's positions, the possibility of finding ways to meet everybody's needs is greatly increased. Identifying the universal needs underlying both sides of an argument speeds positive change and transformation, regardless of whether the disagreement is over how to spend the church budget or how to increase equity in American society at large. What people do or don't say, do or don't do about anything is about a need that is or isn't being met. Dr. Roxy Manning, a Black nonviolent communication certified trainer and clinical psychologist, writes about how NVC can be used towards racial justice. NVC invites us to look beneath the most heinous strategies and find the needs those strategies were designed to meet. When we uncover the needs, we're not saying the strategies are okay. We're not saying, gee, now that I know your intention, I forgive you. We can fully acknowledge the incredible loss and pain stimulated by certain strategies, working to stop the use of those strategies, while still seeing the needs that those strategies were trying to meet. And by seeing the need, we can then work towards new strategies that result in far less harm. If you want to show up and help, you can offer empathy that's grounded in the belief that everyone's humanity matters. Make no mistake, learning and using nonviolent communication skills will make waves at first, wherever you use it. Compassion and nonviolence in communication is as heretical to the religion of American culture as Unitarianism or Universalism ever was to Christianity. But we are a faith founded in heresy. We say what others won't. So talk about your feelings and your needs explicitly. Wonder aloud about those of others. In doing so, you honor the needs and feelings of both. You speak the principles of your faith, and you contribute to transformation through compassion.
Okay. We'll now have a discussion of Lee's presentation. Please hold your hand up.
Okay. All right. Vicky, 1 second. Let me get you up there.
Comment.
There you go.
There I go. Thank you, Lee. It's always a pleasure to listen to your thinking. As I was listening, it occurred to me that I perhaps now understand more clearly why Anthony Fauci is such a good communicator. And it seems to me it's related to the clarity he has of his own need to serve and how that plays out. And it's that clarity of his own needs that forms his communication patterns. And I think he does express feelings too, as I think about it. He talks about his apprehension and anxiety about the future. I guess I'm asking you, Lee, if you think he's a good example of nonviolent communication.
Okay, where'd that go?
I don't know. Go back to Lee, I think.
Oh, she got muted. Hang on. There we go.
Yes, I think that he is a good example. I've noticed too that when he talks, he acknowledges that what he's asking people to do is hard, or he acknowledges that people are probably really tired or frustrated or burned out, and that he acknowledges he is frustrated. He also abstains, and I think of it as graciousness, how I think of it, but now I think of it more as a nonviolent communication strategy. He abstains by judging or moralizing about the content of his request. He makes a clear request based on a public health need, and then he kind of leaves it. He doesn't go that extra step of folding in what I used to would think of as, rhetorically reinforcing the rightness of his argument. But he doesn't focus on the wrongness of the other. He focuses on what the need is and what the request is. And that's where he keeps things.
All right, David, 1 second. Let me get you on there.
Yeah. Two things, quite separate. Firstly, our son is a lawyer north of San Francisco, and he has often, we've noticed, and then he more recently has started acknowledging himself how the language that he uses screws him up, makes him it's hard for him to be the kind of person he wants to be, because all his language is all about winning battles and defeating people and finding what's wrong with people and exposing their weaknesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which leads, so the very language, as you implied, is an issue. So that really struck a chord with me when you began with that acknowledgement of your own experience. But as far as so what's Mitch McConnell's need? What's Donald Trump's need that we should somehow ratify or accept or view with compassion? I just can't see it. I just can't see it. Donald Trump's need, as I interpret it, is for admiration and praise. And I understand what narcissism is, where it comes from, but I can't view that as a worthy need. I can't view that as something that is worthy of my respect. So I really find myself blocked about me when you see those kinds of needs in people.
All right. Yeah, I really hear that, David. It is very difficult, especially in the election cycle that we're in right now and the last 4 years that we've had, to hear that there's fundamental human needs and to hear that for the good of all, we sort of need to acknowledge the underlying need. That doesn't just taste bad. I agree with your assessment of what Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell's needs might be. I'm looking at the needs list right now, and I'm seeing acceptance and appreciation, that I guess, and I'm seeing support, respect, and trust, and also order. So for Mitch McConnell, I would guess that, a misguided sense of order might underlie a lot, or a misguided sense of trust and respect or support. So we can make a wondering guess about someone's need and acknowledge that that's a real need, while still thinking, well, I think it's a misguided application of this need in this way. One of the best training grounds I had for nonviolent communication was when my kids were babies, and I would be going to work and I would be handing off my baby to the infant care provider or the toddler care provider. And the exchange would go something like, well, Casper he feels really fussy. And he's really using his no word a lot. I think it might be because he's constipated, he hasn't had a poop in a while, or I think it might be because he missed nap yesterday or stayed up too late. And it wasn't to say that whatever my infant or toddler was doing was a constructive manifestation of that need, but I was just very much in the mode of always assessing my child's emotions and how they might link to an underlying need in a non-judgmental way that I find it hard to achieve in other spaces. I have been challenged to achieve that in my workspace. That few days before the election results were I think very clear. There was a few days where I would go into patients' rooms and I would hear them talk about pieces of their life. And normally it's so easy for me to open up my heart space to another person, and love and wonder and awe comes pretty naturally. But during that time, I was having a hard time kind of holding an appreciation for that person, while suspecting, based on what they were telling me, that if they had been able to vote on election day, how might they have voted? And it was interfering with my ability to be with them. So I had to, that was one reason why I preached this sermon today, is because it was something that was very much a struggle for me in my work during that week. I'm going to take a second and put those links in the chat box that I promised. Here we go.
All right. Kevin, I've got you up next.
This rings a bell, again, further to some other service we had some previous year, I can't remember when, regards Alan Alda's comments on some of his podcasts, the difference between empathy and compassion, or acceptance and empathy. So if we have strong disagreement with some people, doesn't mean we can't have empathy for them, meaning understanding possibly where they're coming from and what they're talking about. And so if somebody we think is nuts and crazy and we can't accept what they're talking about at all, it doesn't mean maybe we can try to have empathy for them, as I understand the word. So we can understand, well, okay, so what happened in their childhood that caused them to grow up like they did? Or do they have a real psychosis? Do they have a real psychiatric issue? And so we don't have to agree with them at all. And we don't have to have compassion for them, but maybe we can try to understand where they're coming from. That's why I kind of think of this. June has a comment also.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard this, but it has smoothed out lots of bumps in my road with the idea that acceptance does not mean approval. We can accept something and in every sense of the word, and still it doesn't mean approval. That doesn't mean that we have to say I don't approve, but it helps me because I don't feel like it's capitulation.
Yeah, that's good.
I like both of those comments very much, and it helps me to hear you all say them. But I do notice that overall, the comments so far are focusing on the other, on the, on struggling to understand the feelings and needs of the other. And that's frankly, that's the harder part of the two-part needs and feelings analysis. But what you have to do first is get into practice recognizing your own needs and feelings, because we're really just as bad at that as we are, showing that compassion or empathy to the other. So the nonviolent communication trainers, they recommend that you, about every hour, kind of just check in with yourself and put a feeling word out there. Like right now, if I were standing in the elevator and it wasn't going, well, then my feeling would be frustrated and my need would be well, I would probably have to look at my list to be sure, but it would be to get to the shelter of my patient floor, or it would be to get to the rest of the resident's office. And doing that, just focusing on that part of it for a while helps clear the way for the second part. And sometimes we jump over that first part, which we're also not very good at.
And
Excellently.
Lee just sent me the links. I put them in the chat, and I also just sent them out to the email distribution list so that anyone who wants to look at those later, when after the Zoom is closed, will have those links in their email.
Okay. Any other comments?
David, your mic's live. Go for it.
Okay. I just got to say real quick, Kevin's comment about empathy or compassion for the people who you find so hard to accept what they're saying. I find it. I just have to say this, and I'm serious, but I'm sort of half kidding. That when just recently here, when they show brief shots of Trump golfing, I find myself feeling sorry for him. Genuinely, given what's going on in his life and in the world, and his withdrawal from his responsibilities and his complete, I find it slightly pathetic, and that's a much better feeling for me to feel for him than just disgust and anger and hatred and all the other feelings that I might feel. At least that seems better to me.
Anyone else? Well, as usual, Lee, you've given us a lot to think about, a lot to work on, and we really appreciate you sharing your journey on this with us. And now we'll have the extinguishing of the chalice. As we think about our worship concluding, we extinguish this flame, not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we're together again.
Go forth this week of growing tension, uncertainty, and suffering, and be brave enough to name your own feelings and needs, and to hold those of others with compassion and empathy. Amen, and blessed be.